player will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. Ready Player Will here, back from vacation, and this is the Astrius, the Erudite Bolt character review. I'll be calling him Astrius for short, but a character that just came out earlier this week. Lot to cover, so let's not wait any longer. Today's character review, pretty standard things here from terms of the character overview, where we kind of look at him at a glance, the stat analysis, the report card, the general thoughts. We'll go through the abilities, why I think certain things about his kit and the balance of the game, the TMR review, the job-based division card eligibility. I do have some changes here. We're going to look at not just weapon optimization, but some general optimization. I think I've found a happy medium with that section. And then we'll look at some sample builds as well, in addition to just some Truststones to polish things off. And so, kicking things off here, brand new lightning unit added to the game, a little bit delayed from the schedule on JP, but they've given him the unique main job of Warrior of the Woven Will, the Martialist subjob, and the Soldier subjob as well. Now, he does equip great swords. It's the first character in quite some time that's come with that weapon type for us. He does equip armors, helms, and accessories, so a little bit of a heavier type of equipment, with a base move of 3 and jump of 1, pretty standard for most units, as a new 100 cost unit. And my faith recommendation is 50 faith here, where he really doesn't require any status effect considerations in his offensive kit. He does have some self-sustain with a regen that he doesn't necessarily need an external source of healing, but the bottom line, I think 50 is a good sweet spot. From a max range perspective on the main job, I have 5 squares away here, but with an asterisk, because like his main character, Astrius, his big AoE is a cross-shape ability that reaches 5 squares away, so it's not the typical straight-ahead range that we're used to seeing in terms of, from point A to where you're standing to directly in front of you. So a little bit of map geometry to consider there, but functionally 5 squares away. The main job has 2 AoEs and 2 unit scaling abilities, very balanced from that perspective. From a weapon type resistance, he's got 20% to slash, 15% to magic as his 2 strongest. He does have that 10% to strike as well, all 3 of those being the top meta types of damage dealing. He does have 0% to missile, the minus 5% to pierce. This is pretty standard for many of the more recent units that we've seen. Overall, not in a bad spot. The status element resistance is, again, not a huge consideration given the 50 faith recommendation, but 50% to poison, certainly nice. We see a lot of that in the game. 50% to frostbite, certainly nice for a physical damage dealing unit where they do require a lot of AP management. And 10% to paralysis, which a little bit niche, but there's enough paralysis floating around. It's not the worst one. Now, his mastery ability, above what they give others, 20% slash res pen innately all the time. It's a great starting point for him. 30% acquired AP as well. And the 140 ability, they gave him 15 unit res and 30% reaction block rate. So overall, some pretty good attributes to build off of, in my opinion. We'll see how that interacts with the rest of his kit. From a base perspective on his stats, base HP definitely way above that 75th percentile, way above average. 3872 base HP. He's in that higher tier that many of these post-3rd anniversary units are in. He is among them. We look at the base attack, same thing here, definitely well above the 75th percentile of all units in the game. He's got, or at least all physical attack damage units in the game. 417 base attack is a very, very healthy starting point. He's there with many of the other top physical damage dealers. From the base agility, coming in at 56 here, which we've seen base agility only one small portion of where his final speed ends up, but overall, he's in good company here, relatively average. In a good bucket. The base dexterity, kind of the same thing here, maybe just slightly below the 50th percentile statistically speaking, but when you look at how many units are in these groupings that I've made, he's right there with most other units from like a central tendency perspective. So overall base dexterity, not a strength, not a weakness, relatively average in my opinion, which will affect his crit rate as we'll see soon. The base luck though, definitely above average here, even above that 75th percentile, coming at the 184. This is a really good spot here. Just from a general character build perspective, all things considered though, this base luck doesn't do a ton for him, but a lot of that is game balance related, not necessarily Astrius related, but overall base luck is definitely above average here as well, so good to see that. Now for the total stat analysis, those base stats as we kind of transform them into this one chart, I wouldn't say there's any real weaknesses per se. All of these start off in a pretty decent spot. When you factor in the board nodes, the mastery ability, things of that nature, a couple of them take a step back. That luck stat noticeably drops a bit. The attack stat kind of does too, to a degree. But he's got a lot of ways to get that attack stat back up in his main passives. Overall, no real weaknesses. And even the source of the stats here, I don't think there's anything that stood out to me as egregiously bad or wrong or weird or anything. Overall, though, very well rounded. Now, for the agility perspective, he does come in at about 80 agility without any passives equipped. He does have a 12% agility passive, though, which bumps him up into this much higher tier of speedier units in the game. So it's really a nice thing to see when you kind of bucket them here. And again, this is considering vision cards equipped in both the main and sub slot for the 15 and 8% agility bonuses. When you factor him in there with characters that do have passives, he's in this upper tier of characters that can hit up to that 86, which he's right at. Overall, big thumbs up. Now, the crit hit and crit avoid, that crit rate based off the dexterity is relatively average. He's only got 7% crit rate on his whole board, which is a little bit below average for damage dealers. So all things considered, relatively average, not a strong point. The crit avoidance, though, I would say is slightly below average here. Despite that high luck stat on the base side of things, total luck isn't anything special. So overall, just a smidge below on the crit avoidance rate. Now for the accuracy, this is one of the first few real weaknesses in his kit where he's not an accurate unit at all. When you consider accuracy without passives equipped, he's basically at the UR average, but there are many characters that do have passives. And so when you put him on that scale, which is this green line here, definitely far below the average in terms of what most characters have for accuracy. So yeah, not an accurate unit at all. It will take a lot of work to build him up to hitting any kind of levels of accuracy. We'll actually talk about that at the very end of the presentation in my sample builds. Now for the evasion, the base luck stat as well is relatively decent, but the board luck isn't a huge factor. Overall, he's the very bottom bucket tier of what could potentially ever evade anything at all. I do not consider him an evade capable unit. Now for the report card, effective HP, I'm going with a B+ here. He's definitely way above average, really just mostly for the HP levels more than anything. That 15 unit res is certainly nice. No AoE res innately at all in his kit, though, and no innate defense or spirit either. So he's a B+, just again, HP speaking. He's a B+ really being carried by the level of his HP, not necessarily the resist themselves, but his survivability is definitely an A, and this is going to make him feel a lot tankier than he really is from an effective HP perspective. There's too much to cover about it. We'll talk about it on the next slide. Some of the recency bias, though, is part of the map effects. I'll talk about that soon too, but for now, the damage grade, definitely going A+ here. Amazing defense penetration potential. The slash res pen is certainly there. He's got an AoE debuff ability similar to Helen of the Black Rose that reduces an enemy's AoE res by a whopping 60%. He's got a slash resistance in peril that functions similarly in terms of dropping the percentage. So overall damage is absolutely there. He's a very good unit for that reason. The agility going with an A- here, and there's a slight extra thing here. We talked about along the chart that, he's definitely a tier above many's when you equip that passive to get him up to the 86 versus the average of 81, but his main buff is a 25% agility buff, which is an extra 14. So although on paper he might seem relatively average, maybe just a smidge above it, he in that first couple turns will actually be definitely far above the average, considering not all units get that initial buff. Now for the accuracy, going with a D here, below average accuracy. He does have a guaranteed hit on the sub-jump, though. Definitely nice saving grace and an honorable mention, but definitely a D here for what he can potentially achieve. The evasion, D+, not balanced for evade potential at all, in my opinion. For the movement, I'm going with a B here, though, because he does have a move +1 passive, which is part of that agility passive. So you will likely have that on a fair amount of the time, but it is a double-edged sword because he critically needs 2 buffs to really function optimally. That extra move +1 can hurt him sometimes, so we'll talk about that as well in the sample builds. Now for the auto ease of use, going with a C here, if only again for that main teammate buff, because it does have a propensity to repeat if you do not set up your AI and agility tuning properly. I think that can be problematic for the same reason that if he's a 2 buff unit, in my opinion, that if people don't properly gauge the map, how they get baited, what the movement is, I think there's some ways that Astrius will not reach the ceiling that he can. So auto ease of use, I'm going with a C here. The game disruption is definitely an A+, though. He's got so much meta versatility for a bunch of different damage types. He's very consistent in that regard. He came out initially as sort of this like anti-Alaya the Alabaster counter. He's kind of transitioned to even a good anti-magic unit, and he's going to get even better in that regard when the new Esper comes out for him in a week or two. The passives also going with an A here. He's got a fantastic variety of high quality passives. Many of them are very good. The counter, I'm also going with an A here. He's got a great preemptive counter and a physical reflex option too. The overall job and kit is an A. He's got excellent utility. In addition to that offensive potential that we saw, there's a lot of variety in what he does offensively as well from attack types, and he's got a fair amount of bulk to go with it. That's like check, check, check down the line. It's really the lack of accuracy and lack of evasion that's really holding him back in terms of versatility, but he's got the movement +1 that you'd want. He's got the agility that you would want to be able to tune your team for a final grade of an A. This character, I honestly think, is kind of like a boring character. I don't think he's all that flashy per se, but he's amazingly self-sufficient. He's great for game balance. He's a stellar lightning addition. He's a great sword addition as well, and it's an absolute monster enabler for what he brings from buffs and teamfight utility. It's really hard to deny the impact that he has, and in JP, from just data alone, we've seen how good he can be across a variety of different maps and metas. He is still very consistent in that regard. Now for the general thoughts, just talking about that survivability again, and you combine this with his overall higher effective HP, he's got a passive ability that gives him, at the start of the battle, a 3-time 50% physical barrier. Now that can be broken, but to still get that for free is an absolute game changer for survivability compared to other units. He's got 10% regen on one of his buffs that gives him a 30% magic damage, just flat 30% reduction as well. His other buff is a 25 unit res buff and adds a 45% chance of reduced physical damage. He's also re-raise capable. His subjob is shell capable. He's also courage capable on the subjob. So you have a few different ways to play with him there in terms of how you set him up. And he's got an overabundance of utility. He can remove courage on himself, and his limit break adds a follow-up attack, which theoretically is also a courage counter that it does definitely more than 1 HP of damage. So if you kill someone, then the follow-up attack hits, it can still dispel that 1 HP after courage. He's got that AoE barrier break, and it's a general barrier break, not physical, not magical, general. So it takes care of both of them. And he's got a barrier break, albeit a physical barrier break, on his limit break as well. He's also got the 60% AoE res debuff, as I mentioned, the same thing for the slash res debuff. He's got 40% healing power down on an AoE, and there's that 25% agility buff I mentioned that also gives that 25 single attack resistance, which I mentioned above. There's so much packed into there in addition to the actual damage numbers themselves. Really fantastic utility. He's also a defense penetration monster in terms of capability. He can easily hit 80 on his passives. The Hio Vision card gives him another 10 if you wanted. His 120 ability has 30 defense pen on that ability itself. So even if you weren't totally maxing him out for total defense pen, that ability can still reach very high levels. That's a great thing in the current state of the game and the future state of the game. The current results are likely overinflated though due to the current lightning map effects. Right now in Guild War, I think it's 20 unit res to lightning. That completely changes his bulk and what you'll see practically the rest of the time. Arena has a bunch of effects too. So I think there will be some recency bias in the results that you're seeing, but he's still an exceptionally good unit. The Soldier subjob does offer some great extra benefits to him, where you do get that extra 100% guaranteed hit and the protect removal, which is not on his main job. So nice little extra wrinkle there for offensive variety. He's a great PvE unit for those imperils. You don't often see PvE enemies though with lots of AoE res or lots of slash res though. You typically want to bring them negative, not just reduce them by 1%, but still there's value there, and he's got 2 different double hits in there as well. And the Exorcist Vision card is a triple hit for Greatsword, so that's definitely something to consider too. Now he's got some amazing acquired AP potential. We'll talk about that in the sample builds, and what his self buff also gives himself a 33% AP cost reduction. And as I mentioned before, I do think, just generally speaking, it's imperative that he gets that second buff off. He is a different character when you do not have that. I do think many people will struggle with that, in addition to some of his, buff rotation. But that'll consider the passive abilities. I think all 3 of these in blue are very much on the table. Reawakened Memories is that 50% physical barrier for 3 times. It's the attack buff, it's a defense pen. Martialist Lore also gives him the extra 40 defense pen. Battlefield Mobility, which is my favorite here, is that agility of 12% and the move +1. And Avid Historian is an honorable mention because it upgrades 2 of his skills. So I have this in yellow. We'll talk about where those upgrades are, that should you put this on, it's a counter ability, and it's, well, I guess technically they're both counter abilities, but they both get increased chances to proc to very high levels. We'll talk about that. Self-Sacrifice is honestly a really good one. Probably for more PvE though, or for lower defense enemies where you really want to jack up that attack percent, but I think it's kind of unnecessary given what all else is on the table here. They have the counter abilities. Prescient Deterrence is a 70% chance for preemptive damage against slash and strike types. Again, very meta damage types. It's got a range of 4 squares away. If you have that passive equipped, again, that yellow indication here, it bumps it up to a 100% counter chance. So definitely a really nice addition there to guarantee that you're hitting that every single time, unless people have reaction block rate. The physical reflex also certainly nice, but let's transition to the main job buffs here. Power of the Crystal is that teammate buff that will repeat here. It's that agility of 25%. It's the unit res of 25. It's also a dispel courage to self, and he gains a new counter skill for 3 turns, and this is the one that gets upgraded. It's normally a 50% proc chance to reduce physical damage by 45%. This will upgrade to a 70% chance. So definitely a nice extra bit of physical bulk in terms of mitigating the damage if people don't have enough reduction of counter ability against him. So that's a great main job buff. The second one here, which is why I think it's so important, is his courage and regen. It's also the AP reduction of 33% and reduces all magic damage of 30%. So there's so much packed into this for his survivability that I think if you don't have it on, you're going to see a different kind of Astrius out there in the fight. Now for the main job offensive abilities, 4 different slash-oriented type attacks. In terms of range, again, it's that 5 square way, but it's more on more of a cross shape, not the direct in front of him. Direct in front of him is only 4 squares away, but there's a lot to like here. Very, very cheap abilities, all things considered. That you got those 2 different imperils of the slash attack, the AoE res imperil. You got that general barrier break with the healing power down, and the rending retribution is a select 2 ability, and technically will get more potent with the lower the health he has. I don't know exactly the ratio yet. I'm going to test it later, but I at least wanted to talk about it. All things considered, really great main job. A little bit short range, which is good because again, you want both buffs to get off. But yeah, I'm very happy with what they've done with the main job here. And the limit break, this is a 4 square away ability. That's a physical barrier break. Also has that follow-up ability, which is very similar to characters like Bartz and Irvine. It's the same mechanic, essentially. It's also a 67% chance to inflict poison, so absolutely love to see that. This is a fantastic limit break. And he does have 2 vision card abilities. Exorcist, as I mentioned, has that triple hit. It's a great PvE ability. And then Wish on a Winter Night, very much a niche vision card. But this ability is certainly an applicable one where it's a magic barrier of 35% for 3 times. There's also a further decrease of AP consumption here. I don't highly recommend this, but it's certainly a noteworthy option. But overall, a lot of extra good things here to consider. From the sub-job perspective, this one's okay, definitely a little bit more niche. This buff has the water resistance of 20%, which I'm not really concerned about as a lightning unit. Maybe if you're pairing him with fire, I guess. There's like a lightning fire synergy sort of, but even then, not my favorite, considering he has more important buffs. But it is the shell for himself and teammates as well. And Crossblade's an okay ability. Again, kind of unreliable given the shape of it overall. It's a nice enough debuff in terms of attack reduction and agility reduction, but very much niche in my opinion. I'm not a huge fan. The Martial Subjob, this one's not bad. Just to say, combine strike synergies with Alaya, where maybe you get some chain potential. But I don't really think there's anything here that I love that the main job doesn't already have. I really prefer the Soldier Sub, which as mentioned has the 100% hit chance and the Dispel Protect. I think both of these are far more important than anything else on the other sub jobs, so definitely my recommendation. Now for the TMR review, this is actually like a super well-rounded TMR. It's not bonkers good, but it's pretty good, and a couple reasons why. Number one, 3 agility is certainly nice to have another type of TMR that has kind of a wonky agility number on it. Absolutely great for turn order. This ability, obviously I really like the diamond shape buff. Anytime you get a TMR with a cool buff shape, that's an immediate thumbs up for me. It's 2 casts, and this one's kind of like a catch-up where it's like kind of gets everybody in something. The bravery of 24 is certainly nice for quickly raising bravery on when you get a unit for the first time. Typically people use the Cecil TMR or the Velric TMR. This is another one you can now throw into that, but really more for auto PvP. This is generally speaking a 3% damage buff, where if you consider yourself at 97 bravery, the way the modifier works, when you get to 100 bravery with this, it's basically an extra 3% damage, so kind of a small offensive upgrade there. The restore AP of 10 is nice. I don't think it's game-changing, but certainly a nice thing there. The Immobilize and Berserk can be a nice thing. We do see a lot of Berserk potential in auto PvP, so getting another TMR that can do that is certainly a good one. And the Slash Stack 15, kind of niche. Again, you have to be a Slash unit to get the benefit, so it's got a lot of different small things that people appreciate, but I don't think it's overpowering, but it's definitely better than, I think, many TMRs. If not Astrius using it, I could see some other unit using this to some decent benefit, where even for the Berserk resistance, I know a lot of people use the Alaya TMR, and hers is more like a central diamond. This is like a targeted diamond, so I like this extra versatility. Now for the job-based vision cards, Greatsword's not one that we've seen in quite some time. I actually don't love their vision cards at the moment, and it's primarily because they have 3 agility-oriented ones, but to me, of the primary stats you can hunt for, the AoE res, the unit res, or the agility is the lowest priority one for me because most people have the Helena the Black Rose vision card. They also have the Ramza vision card. Newer players don't, obviously, but those 2 rainbow cards are typically just fine and good enough that even if you had to like drop a vision card out of those 3, which not recommended, but sometimes you do, agility is typically one of the ones that you would drop in preference for the AoE and unit. So the fact that they only have 1 AoE card here, they will have the A2 card that is also an AoE res card coming out. That's definitely one to consider. And then technically there is an MR card coming out. It's like the Whisper Stern vision card that also has AoE res on it. So I'm slightly underrepresenting, you know, the versatility of great swords, but there's not a ton of overlap with many other classes. The ones that really come to mind are the Book and the Staff Devout class. And although Book sounds great, there's not a lot of great Book units. Only a couple, so although certainly nice, I see more upside for the Staff Devout class synergy. And if we transition here to JB79's infographic about what greatsword cards are available, a little bit more expansive than mine. Most of these are relatively well-rounded in that you get a couple different ones that emphasize physical man killers, some that are attack percent, some that are HP percent, which is very important for many of these greatsword users because they tend to be more of a bulkier unit overall. There's one that's got the debuff weakening effect on it, 2 different ones that have chain res on them, 2 different ones that have accuracy on them. I'm just waiting for a vision card that has a stronger combination of AoE res and unit res, kind of like the Full Metal card or the Melnia card, because right now, the vision card economy of Greatsword is a little bit weak, even though these cards individually are good cards. Trust me, when you're theory crafting rainbow teams, quite often, I just don't see many Rainbow Greatsword team excels. We'll talk about that more soon. But for now, this is the new general optimization section that I'm creating to better cover a couple different kinds of equips. For weapons here, his new one, the Greatsword of Benediction, is certainly a fine one. It's got enough slash res pen and the human killer for his follow-up attack that I'm pretty happy. I think Astrius Alpha might be the best though, just for the amount of slash res pen on it. But Glacial Crown also has an equal amount of slash res pen, but it's got a much more substantial aim build on it, which I really like. It's up to 28% accuracy on the Glacial Crown. The Asterix Alpha does have the 30 lightning attack though, so definitely a little more offensive oriented. And Buster Sword's still a fine enough sword, but not my favorite of these 3. Now for the other equips that I'm generally considering, I think the Producer's Bowtie is a good one where you consider if you want only a move of 3, but you want to retain his agility. I'll put the Bowtie on him so that he doesn't move too far ahead. The Alexandrite Ring, certainly another good one here for the accuracy. The Genji Glove is definitely a nice one, just generally speaking for damage dealers. The Maximilian Armor and the Brigandine are great bruiser, brawler, bulk types of equipment, which Greatsword as a class is really strong at. The Knight Armor is a little more specific toward the magic meta we're seeing right now, but definitely a nice consideration as well. Now for the Espers, I think pretty standard stuff here. Dark Odin, Bahamut, and Odin are the 3 best ones, but I do like Ultros for the defense pen when you talk about, min-maxing that stat with the variety of ways you can do so. The Sahagan Prince to really play with that agility value overall, and Ochu just for that lightning res, where again, I'm sorry about that, it's not supposed to be Ochu, it's supposed to be Golem, where again, although you're not talking about bringing a lightning team into an earth team, when you do talk about like rainbow potential, if you want to give him some earth resistance for that matchup, this is a great Esper for it. It's got the defense as well, it's got some of the pierce res, but it's also got the human killer most importantly, which applies to all of his attacks, applies to the follow-up attack, so just a fun honorable mention in terms of how you might hedge some of that weakness in a rainbow potential team. And then for the TMRs, again, I don't think he's a strong TMR unit because you really need to emphasize those 2 buffs, but some good honorable mentions here. There's a bunch of haste TMRs that obviously are really good. Being an armor user, the Rob Horn TMR is one of the best in the game, and even the Bard's TMR here for that haste dispel is a really strong one in top end PvP. I like all of these suggestions, but most of the TMRs are probably going to be just stat sticks for you. Now for the sample build, I'm going to go here with a Mono Lightning and then a Greatsword build. This Mono Lightning team is actually one that I'm running today currently in Guild War and have been all week. Real top 5 Guild War. The concept of this team is to actually be more of an accurate oriented lightning team, which again is not his strength, but there's a lot of, let's say, like evade light in the game at the top end. Now this will not hit top tier evasion like Lucio, Halloween Lucio. And again, not the matchup you're really bringing Astrius to. But for that like C tier evasion where people try to get cheeky, This is actually a build to try to stop that, and it works decently well, to be honest. I don't have any hit rate problems, and so I'm combining him here with Winter Wrath and Alaya. From a vision card perspective, I've also got the Squall vision card in the main slot here, which is also some of that strike res. You got the agility percent here on the new Winter Wrath vision card, which yes, applies to all 3 of these units. Pretty cool. And then the old Resolve vision card here in the sub slot. This is only affecting Winter Wrath and Astrius. It gives them the extra accuracy. My Alaya is accurate enough. She doesn't necessarily need the benefits of this vision card, but this is a benefit for the other 2 instead. So you can flex some of these ones in yellow. I have the Slash Res pen here, which again is really only affecting Astrius, but it's got the HP on the Esther card too, so that's kind of why I have it in here. From a equipment perspective though, this Glacial Crown is the aim build. It's that 28% accuracy, and I have the bow tie on him because I do have battlefield mobility on for that extra move of 1. I don't want him using that because quite often he will only get 1 buff off and then he'll end up getting baited. So I'm using the bow tie to counteract that. And the bells here are really just for the stat stick, for the agility, for some of the accuracy that comes with, because from a Truststone perspective, I am running an aim build on him for that extra accuracy, and you can see the passives that I've equipped here for both the Spirit set on the left side, the aim set in this sample build. We'll talk about some of the passives soon, but when you look at the general stats overall, he's past that 11,000 HP threshold, definitely very high. A little bit lower on the defense and Spirit side here at 13 and 17, 1,500 attack overall. The agility at 111 is certainly still serviceable considering how much accuracy related items I have on here for him. You can see his accuracy total hit rate at 347% is not enough to hit characters like Starlight Elena or Lucio. This is really for the accuracy numbers for that like cheeky evade. But outside of that, he's got that 46 unit res innately, 20 AoE res, 85% reaction block rate, 100% acquired AP, which means every time he uses a TP ability, he will get 100% of that TP amount. From a resistance standpoint, 32 slash res, 30 strike res, 25 magic res, pretty well rounded there. He does have hate of 3 as well, which is intentional with the bow tie, that he is the bulkiest unit out of these 3, so I do want him taking some of the hits there. He's got 73 lightning attack here for those modifiers, 50 defense pen in this build, and then 40% debuff weakening. The slash res pen is at 67%, so all things considered, it's a pretty well-rounded character. Again, tuned more for accuracy than anything. You could certainly go more attack-oriented if you wanted, or more bulk-oriented if you wanted, but for now, it's kind of a happy medium. I have the Dark Siren Esper on him for the accuracy and the debuff weakening effect. But when we transition to the Greatsword team that I've prepared here, it's a Astrius, Rain, and Shal's team. Now, I greatly do not recommend a mono Greatsword team. That is exceptionally unbalanced, not nearly enough sustained to play the way they want to. I was very much intrigued to make this build because RNJ just came out with a video asking if Greatsword is the future of War of the Visions. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He put some question marks on there. The answer is no. Even with 2 beads coming out, it's not the future of War of the Visions. But it's certainly way more viable today than it ever has been with Astrius coming into the game. Just conceptually speaking real quick as a kind of a tangent, one of the problems with Greatsword units, and I'll bring up Mode of Calc just to emphasize the point, these are the UR Greatsword units only. They all do virtually the same thing in terms of build. They are all relatively bulky, brawly units that all typically suffer from some kind of accuracy issue. They do skew average to below average on the agility side of things. It's nothing special in that regard. Most of them are exceptionally slash attack oriented, from main to Subjobs, where, you know, Hyo, yes, he's got the Lancer sub, but it's not as a really strong point of his kit. Esther is basically mono slash. Winter Rev, yes, here is mono slash. Joom is virtually mono slash. You never really run that Dragoon. There's no benefit to it. Rain is virtually mono slash, but at least on Rain here, he's got the Flaming Impact, which is a magic type damage. So there's a lot of like redundancy that if you were to ever put 3 of these Greatsword units together, it's going to be super one-dimensional. And just because of the nature of how brawler style comps work, you're going to need some kind of self-sustainer support in there anyway, so you would never really make a triple Greatsword team because the bulk doesn't work without the sustain to go with it. Tangent over. A couple things here. You know, there's some flexibility with what you do with the vision cards. I have here in the main slot the Agility Hyo vision card here. I also have the AoE res on Shal's. The unit res, you're going to have to go with Odin in the meantime, with Greatsword not having a unit res card, as we saw. You have some flexibility in the sub slots. For now, I just put Rains there for the magic percent, considering helps Shal's in Rain, and kind of gives Rain that extra little oomph where this card's made for him, but I don't have a strong opinion on that sub card. And then the Varouche card here is definitely more niche, it's more dark oriented, but it's a slash res pen card, so I kind of wanted to put that in there for both Astrius and Rain. And then when choosing the agility percent cards, I really just wanted the Hio card in the main slot rather than the new Wrath Vision card. I think both have a super competitive reason. You just have to like juggle some of the Vision cards around and swapping those from main slot to sub slot. And it's really just because Shal's is not on that Vision card, that at least on the Hio Vision card she is, so she gets an agility percent buff, but on the sub Vision card, which is only the 8%, which she does not get, it doesn't hurt her as much in terms of turn orders, so it's kind of my primary motivator there. From the equipment perspective, I went with the Asterisk Alpha, which is the Esther sword. Again, I'm not gearing for accuracy here. I'm going for Dark Bahamut on the Esper for really min-maxing his attack stat. I've also switched to the Brigandine armor here for more of that AoE res with that brawl, that bruiser, move the field together kind of build. I also changed the passive here where I took off the agility percent and put the Martialist lore, which is an extra defense pen, just to show you some of the crazy min-max he can get to and how it doesn't necessarily hurt him. That the passives for the Truststones, Truststone passives, but it's the agility set. I'm sorry, not the aim set. So I did swap the Truststone type. And when you look at the stats overall, definitely takes a small hit here on the HP, 10,600 instead of the, 11,000 plus that he had. The defense and spirit, a little bit healthier, 24 defense, 26 spirit. The attack is about the same, 1584, 117 agility though, so a little bit faster in that regard. The dexterity is definitely much higher here for the crit rate potential, as mundane as that might be. The accuracy takes a massive plummet here though, and this whole team is exceptionally inaccurate. They could not hit the broadside of a barn. But when you switch to the defensive stats, you're talking about the 35 unit res, that's a step down. 30 AoE res is a step up, so again, kind of a shift there in survivability. 66% reaction block rate, only 50% acquired AP, still really good though. The resistances are still decent, not exactly as strong. It's more of a magic niche here because of the Hio Vision card in the main slot where he's at 50% magic res, only 10% strike res, and 20% slash res. He does get up to 24% dark res though because of the Varouche Vision card that I have here. So when you talk about fighting like VV and Raph, let's say, which is not typically an evade comp, so you probably could take this team against them as like a magic bruiser team versus a magic oriented team. That dark res certainly helps. He takes a slight step back on the lightning modifier here, where he was formerly at 73, but is a way more human killer to offset that. And he's up to 100 defense pen all times permanently in this build. Again, the passive change here, the Hio Vision card and the Truststone passive make it so that every single ability he hits will be 100 defense pen. Might be slightly overkill, but then you think about someone like Summer Glaciella who can reduce your defense pen by 30, that even his 120 ability will increase it back by 30, so he'll still be at 100 defense pen. There's time and place, it can be worth it. And he still has 67% weapon or slash res pen, so overall, very strong there for penetrations. Drops down to 8% debuff weakening from the 40%, so definitely a pretty steep drop there, but all things considered, this is still a relatively solid team. It's a pretty decent anti-magic bruiser team. I honestly don't have enormously high hopes for it, but it's still good to at least see the stats of what that would look like when all put together. Now for the Truststones on the left side, HP, Spirit, and Defense are definitely the best ones. I'm just going Spirit right now because that's the meta we're in. In terms of the passive recommendations, I do recommend the 6. Obviously, if you have the Brigandine, you can drop that HP 10% and put in something like Crit Evade 15 instead, which is actually, did I do that here? I didn't write it, but that's what I did on this last build. He had Crit Evade of 15. Sorry, I didn't update that. On the right side, I'd go attack 20%, defense pen 10, healing power 10 to help his self-regen. Obviously, external heals as well. Reaction block 20, I think, is really strong because there's a lot of counter abilities on tanks that have reduced slash damage counters, and he's primarily slash damage, so that'll help with that. You can probably go for the extra acquired AP of 20%. Might be overkill, but I personally prefer it. The dexterity of 15%, I don't mind as well. His dexterity is kind of whatever, that I like the extra help. The lightning attack is definitely a good one for lightning attack 10, but the slash res pen of 10 I don't think you need because so many of the weapon options already have the slash res pen in it that it's probably going to be very redundant, but honorable mention. You have some things to play with. For the right side, I would say agility sets and the aim sets. I think aim is definitely a viable one because he's got the agility passive, which can kind of compensate for it. But that's the Astrius, the Erudite review in a nutshell. Again, a lot to talk about. It's a very fun and complex character in different regards that as the game changes, he can adapt decently well to it, as we've already proven to see on the JP side of things, and I've no doubt he'll continue to do so. And honestly, will likely be a staple for many great sword teams in the future as well. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all later.